That night, when my own son shouted, "Get out, Mom! My fiance doesn't want you here," something inside me shattered in a way I didn't yet understand. Some words don't just hurt, they brand themselves into your memory forever. You don't forget them, you don't forgive them. My name is Victoria. I was 57 years old that night, standing in front of nearly 200 wedding guests, realizing that a single moment can destroy a family and quietly begin saving a life. What none of them knew was that this wasn't just a wedding, it was the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight. The ranch garden was glowing under soft lights, wrapped in white flowers I had chosen myself. The band had been playing since sunset, and the long tables were covered with linen cloths I had embroidered during countless sleepless nights. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. Ethan, my son, was marrying Olivia, the woman with light eyes and a polite smile that never reached them. She appeared in our lives 2 years earlier and slowly changed everything. I wore a royal blue dress, the same one my mother wore at my own wedding. I pinned my hair into a neat bun, telling myself I needed to look dignified. I was the groom's mother. I belonged there. When I entered the hall, Olivia saw me. She didn't greet me. She leaned in and whispered something into Ethan's ear. I watched his shoulders tense before he walked toward me with quick, sharp steps. I knew that look, the same look he had as a boy when he knew he was about to do something wrong but couldn't stop himself. He lowered his voice and said, "Mom, Olivia thinks your dress is stealing attention. The color is too flashy." The words hit my chest like a fist. Still, I swallowed my pride. "It's fine, son. I'll change. I brought another dress." But Ethan's voice hardened. "No, it's better if you leave." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. He continued, "Olivia is nervous. She says your presence makes her tense. She feels judged." The music kept playing. Guests laughed, unaware that my life was breaking 10 feet from the head table. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I'm your mother. I organized this wedding. I paid for half of it." His reply came louder than I expected, louder than the band. "And you think that gives you the right to ruin my wife's day?" The room went silent. Every face turned towards us. And then he said it clearly, so clearly that it echoed inside me. "Get out, Mom. My fiance doesn't want you here." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, picked up my purse, and walked away. No one followed me. No one stopped me. That silence hurt more than the shouting. I drove back to the ranch alone. The keys hung from a chain around my neck, the same keys my father placed in my hand before he died, along with the land, the house, and the weight of 4 generations. The same keys Ethan had wanted ever since Olivia entered his life. That night, I folded the blue dress carefully and placed it back in the closet. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, wondering when my son had stopped being mine. If you're still listening, stay with me, because this is where everything truly begins. And if stories like this matter to you, the ones that uncover hidden family truths, quietly stay connected. There's much more coming. The next morning, when my phone rang and Ethan's name appeared, I already knew the tone of his voice before I answered. "Mom, can you come to the ranch? We need to talk." I hung up without replying. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, the same French roast I used to make for Ethan when he was a boy, and woke early to help me with the horses. Before Olivia, before the distance, my son and I were a team. When my husband died 15 years earlier, it was just Ethan and me. He was 12, quiet, serious, trying to grow up too fast. "I can fix the fence, Mom," he'd say, carrying tools heavier than his arms. He learned to herd cattle, repair tractors, negotiate suppliers. When I cried at night missing his father, he held me and whispered, "Everything will be okay, Mom, I promise." And for years, he kept that promise. When Ethan finished college, he came back to the ranch. "My place is here, Mom," he said, "with you." We sat on the porch every evening watching the sun dip behind the trees my grandfather planted. "One day, my kids will grow up here," he'd tell me. "They'll run through these same yards." I believed him. I believed my son. Then Olivia arrived, polished, confident, talking about investments and returns. The first time she stepped into the house, she looked around and asked, "You live here?" Ethan smiled proudly. "We live here." She smiled too, but her eyes told a different story. After that, Ethan came home later. He talked about selling cattle, modernizing, turning the ranch into a venue. "It's business, Mom," he said. He had never used that word before. The keys on my neck felt heavier every day. My father's warning echoed in my memory. "Don't let anyone take this land from you, not even your son." I hadn't understood then. I did now. That afternoon, Ethan called again. His voice was colder. "Mom, I need the ranch keys." I heard Olivia's voice in the background. They wanted to remodel, to change things, to erase history piece by piece. When I refused, Ethan snapped, "Things change, traditions change." And just like that, I realized the boy who promised to protect this land was slipping away. When I hung up the phone, I touched the keys and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It wasn't about a dress. It was about control, about inheritance, about who would decide my future. And standing alone in that quiet kitchen, I understood something terrifying and true. The real battle hadn't started yet. The silence after that call stayed with me like a shadow. I walked through the ranch house, touching walls, photographs, memories, trying to remind myself that this place was real, that my life hadn't suddenly turned into someone else's nightmare. The keys rested against my chest, cold and familiar, and for the first time I wondered whether love alone was enough to protect what generations before me had built. Before we go any further, stay with me, because what happened next revealed intentions I never imagined. And if stories that uncover hidden family truths matter to you, quietly stay connected. There's more you'll want to hear. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the old wooden kitchen table, drinking coffee that went cold in my hands, replaying Ethan's voice over and over. By morning, I understood one painful truth. This wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. When Ethan called again, his tone confirmed it. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He said, "Mom, Olivia and I want to make some changes. We need access to the house." Access. Not help, not support. Access. I told him calmly that the ranch wasn't a project, it was my home. That's when he said it, the sentence that made my stomach drop. "Legally, it's my house too." He was right, in part. My husband had left him 50% ownership, but he had left control, administration, to me. My husband knew something. He always did. And suddenly, I understood why. That afternoon, I called Mr. Miller, our family lawyer. He'd known us for decades, knew every corner of the ranch, every clause of the will. When he arrived, his face was serious in a way I hadn't seen before. I told him everything: the wedding, the shouting, the keys, Olivia's sudden interest in remodeling. When I finished, he leaned back and said quietly, "Victoria, you need to be careful." He explained something I hadn't fully considered. Ownership gives people ideas, power gives them plans, and pressure changes people, even family. Then he asked a question that froze me. "Has anyone asked about your mental capacity?" I laughed at first. Then I stopped, because the idea wasn't ridiculous, it was dangerous. That same evening, Ethan sent a message. "Olivia wants to invite you to lunch, just the two of you. She wants peace." Every instinct told me not to go, but another part of me, the mother, needed to hear the truth directly. I agreed. The restaurant overlooked the ranch land, ironic and cruel. Olivia was already there when I arrived, calm, confident, a glass of wine in front of her. She smiled as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't watched my son throw me out of his wedding. She spoke softly, carefully, choosing every word like a chess move. She told me Ethan was stressed, that he felt trapped between me and her, between the past and the future. Then she said what she had really come to say. The ranch was a burden, too big, too expensive, too much for a woman my age. She suggested selling, renting, partnering. She spoke about hotels, events, profits, and finally, the keys. We'd need full access, she said lightly, for renovations. I asked her where I would live. She smiled. Wherever you want, somewhere comfortable, something more appropriate. Appropriate, for my age, for my usefulness. I realized then that this lunch wasn't about peace, it was about removal, quiet, polite removal. When she refused, her smile disappeared. She called me selfish, said I was clinging to the past, that I was standing in the way of my son's future. I stood up, paid for my water, and left. My hands were shaking, but my decision was firm. The ranch was not for sale. That night, Mr. Miller returned unexpectedly. He carried a manila envelope and urgency in his eyes. Inside was a letter, my husband's handwriting. He had written it weeks before his death, after hearing another man's story about losing everything to manipulation. The letter warned me, not about Ethan, but about someone who might change him, someone who would disguise greed as modernity. As I read, I cried not from fear, but from recognition. My husband had seen this coming. He had trusted me to stand firm, and in that moment, I decided I would. The next morning, I took action. I visited my doctor. I requested full physical and cognitive evaluations. Perfect health, he said. I asked for it in writing. Then I went to the bank and secured every important document. I was no longer reacting, I was preparing. When Ethan called again, his voice was different, colder, rehearsed. He suggested therapy, a doctor, a break from the ranch, just for your own good, Mom. And then he asked for the keys again. That was the moment I knew exactly how far this could go. No, I said, calmly, clearly. He hung up. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, I saw 3 vehicles pull into the drive, Ethan, Olivia, and 2 lawyers. My heart sank, but my spine stayed straight. Inside my own living room, they spoke about division of assets, forced sales, and concerns about my ability to manage alone. Then, Olivia dropped the final weapon. She was pregnant. They talked about grandchildren, about futures, about money, about my responsibility to step aside. When Ethan demanded the keys, screaming, furious, something inside me hardened forever. I pressed the keys to my chest and told him the truth. They weren't his future, they were his past, and until he understood that, he would never have them. That was the day my son told me he no longer had a mother. When the door closed behind them, the house felt emptier than it ever had. But as I sat alone, crying in silence, I also felt something else, clarity. Whatever came next, I would face it standing, because dignity once given away is never returned. And the next step I took would change everything, forever. After they left that day, the house felt larger than ever. Every footstep echoed, every memory pressed down on my chest. I sat in the armchair where my husband used to read the paper every morning and finally allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of crying that empties you from the inside out. I cried for Ethan, for the boy who once promised to protect this land, and for the man who now saw me as an obstacle. But when the tears stopped, something else remained. Determination, cold, clear, unmovable. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, listening to the wind move through the trees my grandfather planted decades ago. The land was quiet, patient, as if it had seen this kind of pain before. And maybe it had. Generations fight, generations forget, but the land remembers. As the sun rose, I understood one thing with painful clarity. Love without boundaries had brought me here. If I wanted to survive this, I needed to choose myself. The next morning, I called Mr. Miller and told him I wanted to rewrite my will. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Victoria?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. I was done reacting. It was time to act. In his office, I spoke slowly, clearly, with a steadiness that surprised even me. I placed the ranch into a protected family trust. It could not be sold, divided, or modified for decades. Ethan would receive profits only under strict conditions: cultural, educational, historical use. No hotels, no events, no exploitation. If he contested it, he would lose everything. When I signed the documents, my hand didn't shake. I wasn't punishing my son. I was protecting him from becoming someone he couldn't live with. 2 weeks later, Ethan found out. He called me late at night, drunk, angry, broken. "How could you do this to me?" he shouted. "You stole my inheritance." I listened quietly, then said the truth he wasn't ready to hear. "I didn't steal it, Ethan. I protected it from you." He cursed me, called me selfish, and hung up. That was the last time I heard his voice for months. The lawsuit moved forward anyway. Papers arrived, accusations, cold legal language that tried to turn love into numbers and memory into property value. Mr. Miller warned me it could take years. "Legally, we can win," he said gently, "but emotionally," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I kept living. I tended the roses my mother planted. I fed the chickens. I watched sunsets alone. The ranch didn't abandon me. It held me. And slowly, the pain stopped screaming and began whispering instead. I learned how to sit with it. Then one afternoon, Mr. Miller came without his briefcase. That's how I knew something was wrong. He told me Ethan and Olivia had separated. The divorce was finalized. The baby, my grandson, was born, but Olivia had full custody and moved away. Ethan lost his job. He was drinking, living alone in a cheap motel. The relief I expected never came, only grief. My son was broken, and I couldn't fix him. That realization hurt more than the betrayal ever had. Love doesn't always save people. Sometimes it only watches. Weeks later, I saw Olivia in town. Perfect clothes, perfect smile, a new man beside her, older, richer. She looked untouched by the wreckage she left behind. When she waved at me, I didn't wave back. In that moment, I understood something important. People like Olivia don't lose loudly. They lose quietly, in ways that take years to surface. Then, one cold December morning, someone knocked on my door at dawn. When I opened it, Ethan was standing there. He looked nothing like the man who yelled at me. Thin, unshaven, eyes red with exhaustion and regret. He didn't argue, he didn't demand, he didn't justify. He simply broke down and whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I pulled him into my arms, and he cried like he did when he was a child who fell off his bicycle, loud, helpless, ashamed. We sat in silence for a long time, drinking coffee, watching the sun rise over the land he once wanted to sell. The keys still hung around my neck, and for the first time in years, I didn't know whether holding them meant protection or forgiveness. Ethan stayed that day, then the next, and the next. We didn't talk about the lawsuit. We didn't talk about Olivia. We didn't talk about the keys hanging against my chest. We worked instead, the way we used to before everything broke. We fixed fences together. We fed the animals at dawn. We sat on the porch at sunset, saying nothing, letting silence do the work words couldn't. I watched Ethan carefully. The anger was gone, but something else had taken its place. Shame. Heavy, persistent shame. He avoided my eyes when the phone rang. He flinched when letters arrived in the mail. At night, I could hear him pacing in the guest room like a man who didn't know where to put his guilt. And I understood something painful. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It only opens the door for change. One evening, while we were repairing a broken gate, Ethan finally spoke. "Mom, I didn't recognize myself anymore," he said quietly, tightening a bolt too hard. Everything I did felt justified at the time, like I was finally becoming someone important. I didn't interrupt. I let him bleed words instead of wounds. "She kept saying you were controlling me, that you were holding me back." And I believed her because it was easier than admitting I was afraid. Afraid. That word mattered. Ethan had never been afraid as a boy. He faced storms, broken tractors, grief, responsibility, all of it. But adulthood introduced a new fear, becoming ordinary. Olivia promised him more money, more status, more power, and slowly he traded values for approval. The lawsuit crawled forward in the background like a shadow that never fully disappeared. Mr. Miller updated me monthly. The same answer every time. They had no real case, but they weren't giving up. I could see the weight of that on Ethan's shoulders, guilt layered on top of regret. One night, he finally asked the question I knew was coming. "Are you ever going to give me the keys back?" I looked at him for a long moment. Not at the man who yelled at me, not at the boy who betrayed me, but at the person in front of me now, broken, learning. "The keys were never the problem, Ethan," I said softly. "They were the test." He nodded, tears filling his eyes because he understood that he had failed it once already. Months passed. The ranch slowly healed us both. Routine became medicine. Responsibility rebuilt what ambition had destroyed. Ethan stopped drinking. He started therapy. He found a small job in town fixing engines. Honest work, hard work. He came home every evening tired but sober, and for the first time in a long while, I slept without fear. Then, one afternoon, a small boy ran toward me across the yard, laughing, wild, free, familiar. My grandson, Robert, named after my husband. Seeing him run where Ethan once ran broke something open inside me that I didn't know was still closed. Ethan watched me lift Robert into my arms, watched the boy cling to my neck, and I saw a new pain in his eyes, not jealousy, but grief for everything he almost destroyed. That night, after Robert went to sleep, Ethan sat beside me on the porch. "Mom," he said quietly, "now I understand why Dad left you the keys." I didn't answer. "It wasn't to control me," he continued. "It was to protect me from myself." I reached for his hand. That was the first night I felt peace again. But peace never comes without one final test. 2 weeks later, the court papers arrived again. A new motion, one last attempt. Olivia's lawyers pushed for forced division, using my age, my solitude, my resistance as evidence. Ethan read the document silently. Then he looked up and said something I never expected. "I want to withdraw my claim." I felt my breath catch. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded. "I don't want this anymore. I don't want the money. I don't want the fight. I just want to be someone my son won't be ashamed of." When Mr. Miller confirmed it was possible, Ethan signed the withdrawal himself. The lawsuit ended quietly, not with victory, but with surrender. That night, I removed the keys from my neck and placed them on the table between us, not as a gift, not as forgiveness, but as a promise that one day, if he remained worthy, they could return to him. And as I watched Ethan stare at those keys without touching them, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't come from winning a battle, but from choosing not to fight anymore. Time did what arguments never could. It softened the sharp edges, dulled the pain, and revealed truths that shouting only hid. After Ethan withdrew the lawsuit, life on the ranch didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became honest. We lived without pretending, without negotiating love for control. The keys stayed on the table for a long time, untouched, as if even they needed time to trust again. Ethan worked steadily. He left early each morning for the mechanic shop in town and returned covered in grease, exhausted but sober. Every evening we shared simple meals, nothing fancy, nothing forced. Some nights were quiet. Other nights memories spilled out when neither of us expected them to. He talked about the pressure he felt in the city, the humiliation of realizing he had been manipulated, the unbearable shame of knowing he almost lost everything that mattered. I listened without interrupting. I had learned that listening is sometimes the bravest form of love. One evening, while we were fixing a broken fence near the old oak trees, Ethan stopped and looked around. "I used to think this place was holding me back," he said. "Now I see it was the only thing holding me together." I didn't respond right away. I watched the sun slip behind the hills and felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness yet, but acceptance. Months passed. Seasons changed. The lawsuit became a memory instead of a threat. Robert, my grandson, began visiting regularly. When he ran through the same fields where Ethan once played, laughing without fear, I understood why this fight had mattered so much. Not for control, not for money, but for continuity, for roots. One afternoon, Ethan asked if he could take Robert fishing at the creek. I watched them walk away together, father and son, and I realized how close I had come to losing both. That thought still made my hand shake. Around that time, Mr. Miller came by with paperwork I had requested months earlier. I had thought about it carefully, without anger, without revenge. I modified my will one last time. The ranch would return to Ethan completely, but only after 10 consecutive years of stewardship. No selling, no exploiting, no shortcuts. If he failed, the land would pass to Robert when he turned 25. When I explained it to Ethan, he didn't argue, he didn't negotiate. He simply nodded and said, "That's fair." That word, fair, felt heavier than any apology. Not long after, I saw Olivia again. She arrived to drop off Robert, stepping out of a sleek car, dressed perfectly as always. She spoke about hotels, travel, success, the same shine, the same polish, but when she removed her sunglasses, I noticed something new in her eyes. Not anger, not triumph, emptiness, the kind that no amount of money fills. When Robert ran toward me shouting, "Grandma!" she watched silently, and for the first time I felt no resentment toward her, only distance. That night, Ethan said something that stayed with me. "Mom, I used to think strength meant winning. Now I know it means staying." He didn't touch the keys, he didn't ask for them, and that's how I knew he was finally changing. Still, something remained unresolved, a quiet fear I hadn't yet faced. Time heals many wounds, but it also tests promises, and I knew one final moment was coming, one that would decide whether this fragile peace would last. Because life has a way of asking one last question just when you think the answers are clear. The final lesson didn't arrive with shouting, lawyers, or threats. It arrived quietly, the way truth usually does when it knows you're finally ready to hear it. Years passed on the ranch, not dramatically, not loudly, but honestly. I turned 62, surrounded by land that remembered me, by routines that healed me, and by a son who was slowly becoming himself again. Not the man Olivia tried to shape, but the boy who once promised to protect this place. Ethan never asked for the keys again. That mattered more to me than any apology. He worked, saved, learned patience the hard way. Therapy taught him how manipulation works, how guilt disguises itself as love, and how ambition without values becomes destruction. Some nights we sat on the porch in silence, watching the stars. Other nights he asked questions about his father, questions he should have asked years earlier. One evening, while repairing the corral fence, Ethan stopped and said something I will never forget. "Mom, I finally understand why Dad trusted you with everything." I looked at him, waiting. "You don't protect things by owning them," he said. "You protect them by knowing when to say no." In that moment, I knew the man standing beside me wasn't lost anymore. The lawsuit officially ended 3 years after it began. Mr. Miller closed the file with a tired smile. "It's over, Victoria," he said, not because the law decided, but because people finally did. And he was right. Courts settle property. Life settles consequences. My grandson Robert grew fast. Every month when Ethan brought him to the ranch, I watched the land teach him the same lessons it taught us: patience, responsibility, belonging. When Robert climbed the old oak tree or helped feed the animals, I felt the circle slowly closing. History wasn't broken, it was continuing. Olivia remarried, a wealthy man, big houses, travel, perfect photos. From a distance, it looked like success, but the last time I saw her, something was missing behind her smile: peace. She handed Robert over without a hug, without a kiss, already distracted by her phone, and I understood then some people win money and lose roots. They never notice what's gone until it's too late. One winter afternoon, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table with Mr. Miller one last time. I changed the will again, this time not out of fear, but out of faith. The ranch would return fully to Ethan, no trusts, no foundations, if he proved for 10 consecutive years that he could protect it without selling, exploiting, or betraying it. If he failed, it would go to Robert when he turned 25. When Ethan signed, his hands didn't shake. He looked at me and asked softly, "Do you think I can do it?" I answered honestly, "I don't know, my love, but I believe you deserve the chance." That night, I took the keys off the chain around my neck, something I hadn't done in years. I placed them in Ethan's open hand, not as surrender, not as reward, but as trust earned through pain, patience, and change. He closed his fingers around them and cried, not from victory, but from understanding. Today, I sit on the same porch where I once cried alone, watching Robert chase chickens and Ethan repair a fence with steady hands. The land is quiet. My heart is quieter. I finally understand something that took me a lifetime to learn. Love doesn't mean holding on forever, and letting go doesn't mean stopping loving. Sometimes, loving someone means allowing them to fall so they can learn how to stand. My name is Victoria. I lost my son once to save us both, and I learned that dignity, when protected, has a way of returning everything else in time. The keys no longer feel heavy, they feel right. And now I ask you, not as a storyteller, but as a woman who survived this choice, have you ever had to let go of someone you loved to save yourself?